When I arrived at the family reunion, I was greeted with a name tag that read "Biggest Disappointment," a cruel joke everyone seemed in on. So I quietly took the stage, thanked them for the warm welcome, and announced that I just sold my startup for $4.2 million. Suddenly, the joke wasn't so funny anymore. At the family gathering, which I had financed, my father pointed at my face before everyone present. "You declined to provide $50,000. You ruined this household." They placed me at the furthest table, with a name tag declaring, "Biggest letdown." I offered no protest. I simply smiled, retrieved a bundle of documents, tore them in half, and departed. An hour later, they finally comprehended what I had dismantled and began calling relentlessly. "Thank you for joining me today. I trust you are experiencing a wonderful day, wherever you may be. I would appreciate it if you could share in the comments which city or country you are watching from, and what time it is there currently. Now, let us commence our narrative together." At the family gathering, which I had financed, my father pointed at my face before everyone present. "You declined to provide $50,000. You ruined this household." They placed me at the furthest table, with a name tag declaring, "Biggest letdown." I offered no protest. I simply smiled, retrieved a bundle of documents, tore them in half, and departed. An hour later, they finally comprehended what I had dismantled and began calling relentlessly. The scent of freshly trimmed grass invariably transports me back to him, not my father, nor my mother, but Mark, my younger sibling. He was the favored child, the sportsman, the effortlessly charming socialite. I was the reserved one, the observer, the child whose nose was perpetually immersed in a book. Our parents, bless their hearts, never attempted to conceal their favoritism. It was as evident as the midday sun. I recall the aroma of freshly cut grass from Mark's baseball field mingling with the bittersweet sensation of being overlooked. My chest would constrict, a familiar ache, as my mother and father's cheers for him resonated across the diamond, while my own quiet triumphs in the dusty corners of the library went largely unacknowledged. I would observe Mark receiving his pristine baseball glove, the leather still firm and lustrous, while my own well-worn one, painstakingly mended with adhesive tape, was deemed adequate. His birthday celebrations were extravagant affairs, filled with merriment and towering piles of gifts, a symphony of happiness that felt foreign to my own subdued dinners, where a single cake and a polite, "Happy birthday" sufficed. They would radiate pride as Mark crossed the finish line in a school track event, even if he placed fifth. For my science fair victories, for the hours I dedicated to constructing intricate models or solving complex equations, I would receive a polite nod, a murmured, "That's pleasant, dear." It wasn't malice, not precisely. It was simply a preference, a profound, undeniable partiality that forged a divide between us. This subtle yet constant dynamic imprinted itself upon my spirit early on. I attempted to bridge the divide. I would bring home flawless academic reports, hoping for a glimmer of that same effusive pride. I tried to participate in discussions about Mark's sports, feigning interest, hoping to be included in their shared world. Yet, it was always a transparent barrier. I could see them, hear them, but I could not truly connect. The silence that followed my endeavors felt heavier than any shouted word. That is when a quiet resolve began to ignite within me. If their approval was an elusive target I could never hit, then I would aim for something entirely different. I would achieve success on my own terms, propelled by a desire for autonomy and a deep-seated need to validate my worth, not just to them but to myself. My venture into entrepreneurship emerged from this silent defiance. I started humbly, in my college dormitory, sustained by inexpensive coffee and an insatiable thirst for knowledge. Countless late nights merged into early mornings, the glow of my laptop screen a constant companion. I meticulously delved into market research, acquired programming languages, and refined my abilities in digital marketing. My company, a small but agile tech startup, began to expand, steadily at first, then with accelerating momentum. Each minor triumph, each new client, was a testament to my own tenacity, built without a single word of encouragement or financial contribution from my family. I made a deliberate choice to keep my financial prosperity largely confidential. It was not merely a quiet protest against their materialistic values. It was a calculated maneuver. I was aware of their history. Mark's life was a succession of impulsive, ill-fated ventures, always rescued by our parents, draining their savings like a leaking faucet, a failed restaurant, a questionable cryptocurrency investment, a chain of upscale car washes that dissolved more swiftly than a summer storm. Each time, they delved deeper into their retirement funds, murmuring about family investments and nurturing his aspirations. My frustration intensified with each failed attempt, observing them gradually dismantle their own financial future for a son who appeared incapable of learning from his errors. I knew with chilling certainty that if they ever became aware of my expanding wealth, I would become their next financial resource. I had to safeguard my hard-earned tranquility, my assets, from their anticipated demands, from Mark's perpetual financial abyss. The pressure began to build approximately 6 months ago. Mark had conceived his latest, most ambitious plan, a groundbreaking tech startup that, to my experienced perception, was a fragile construct built on wishful thinking and no market analysis. He required a $50,000 loan, and my parents, having depleted their own resources, turned to me. "He is your brother, Eric. Family assists family," my mother pleaded over the phone, her voice tinged with an unfamiliar desperation. "Do you wish to see your brother fail? This could be our family's great opportunity." My father, typically the composed one, echoed her sentiments, his voice strained. Their words felt like tiny needles piercing old wounds. "Family assists family," I murmured to myself, the bitter irony a knot in my throat. I observed the glint of desperation in their eyes, the blind faith in Mark's endless pledges, and a chilling realization settled in. I was the last hope, the ultimate safeguard before they lost everything. It was a painful decision, but a necessary one. I declined to co-sign the loan. It was not solely about the money. It was about establishing a boundary, a tangible step towards self-preservation, a silent cry against years of being undervalued. Yet, as I refused, I also formulated a parallel strategy, a quiet act of my own. I would offer them genuine family support, on my terms, from my accomplishments. I collaborated with my financial advisor, Mr. Albright, to prepare the documents, a substantial gift for my parents, settling their mortgage, a gesture of authentic affection and financial security, and for Mark's daughter, my niece, a trust fund for her education, securing her future regardless of her father's choices. This was my method of protecting the innocent, a quiet act of benevolence. I prepared the documents meticulously, enclosing them in a plain folder. The anticipation weighed heavily in my chest. I envisioned the moment, the expression on their faces as they grasped the true extent of my generosity. I hoped this tangible proof of my affection and success would finally make them perceive me, truly perceive me. The email arrived 2 months ago. Family Reunion Summer 2025. It was sent by Mark, of course, with a cheerful, generic message about reconnecting. The irony was not lost on me. I was the one covering the expenses for the entire event, the venue, the catering, the decorations. Every last detail was meticulously planned and paid for by me, a final attempt to mend fractured relationships, to demonstrate my commitment despite the vast emotional distance. I scrutinized menus, debated with florists, and negotiated with the DJ, all while managing my flourishing business. It was a labor of love mixed with a desperate hope for reconciliation, a silent plea for them to acknowledge me, just once. In the weeks preceding the reunion, the phone calls from my parents became increasingly imbued with subtle criticisms and thinly veiled resentment regarding my refusal to co-sign Mark's loan. "Mark is struggling, Eric. We simply do not comprehend why you could not assist your own brother." Mark himself avoided my calls, his silence a louder accusation than any words. The undercurrent of disapproval from other family members, subtly swayed by my parents' distorted account, was palpable. Whispers would cease as I entered a room, averted gazes followed me. The atmosphere was dense with unspoken judgment, like a stifling blanket. The day of the reunion dawned bright and clear, but the lightness of the summer morning did not penetrate the oppressive atmosphere at the event hall. The aroma of roasted chicken and fresh bread mingled with the faint metallic taste of apprehension in my mouth. I arrived early, ensuring everything was flawless, a final desperate act of hospitality. The initial greetings were awkward, forced smiles that did not reach anyone's eyes. I observed other family members embracing, their laughter effortless and genuine, and felt a familiar pang of exclusion. My throat felt constricted, as if I had swallowed a stone. Then he entered. My father, typically reserved, a man of few words, especially concerning emotions. He surveyed the room, his eyes scanning, searching. They landed on me, and I witnessed a flicker of something I had not seen in years: raw, unadulterated fury. He drew a deep breath, and his voice, amplified by the sudden silence that descended upon the room, boomed across the hall. "You declined to provide $50,000. You ruined this household." His finger, trembling with self-righteous indignation, pointed directly at my face. The sting of his words, cutting deeper than any physical blow, resonated through me. The shame and mortification washed over me, a hot tide amplified by the silent, watchful eyes of our extended family. The sensation of blood rushing to my ears, the heat rising in my face. His voice, usually a steady rumble, cracked with an anger I had not seen directed at me in years. It was not merely words. It was a physical assault, stripping away years of carefully constructed composure. The air in the room seemed to thicken, each silent gaze from a cousin or aunt a fresh wound. My chest tightened, a familiar pressure, as if someone had wrapped barbed wire around my lungs. Mark, standing beside my father, wore a subtle, triumphant smirk. My mother, typically the more outwardly empathetic, offered a silent, complicit nod, a tacit endorsement of my father's brutal outburst. No one spoke, no one intervened. I was utterly alone in that crowded room. Then, a sharp-faced cousin, a sycophant always seeking my parents' approval, approached a table laden with place cards. With a flourish, she selected a small, handwritten one and placed it at the very end of the children's table, tucked away in the farthest corner of the room. It was a deliberate act of exclusion, a symbol of my diminished standing. The name tag, hastily scrawled in black marker, read, "Biggest letdown." The ink bled slightly at the edges, mirroring the anguish in my heart. I felt a sharp, icy pang in my stomach. My gut churned, a familiar reaction to their cutting remarks. A wave of profound exhaustion washed over me, a sensation of being utterly vanquished. The years of neglect, the constant comparison, the endless demands, the emotional manipulation, it all culminated in this public spectacle. This was the moment I truly reached my lowest point, where the illusion of family shattered completely. I briefly excused myself, my legs feeling like lead, and walked into the quiet solitude of the men's restroom. I stared at my reflection, my eyes red-rimmed, a stranger gazing back. The house I had grown up in, the one I had just paid to host this very reunion, suddenly felt alien. Every family photograph on the wall felt like an accusation. "Is this what family signifies to you?" I whispered to the empty room, my voice breaking on the last word. But then, something shifted within me. The pain, the shame, it solidified into a cold, hard determination. No more. No more pleading for their approval. No more conforming to their rules. This was not about Mark's business. It was about control, about their narrative, about maintaining their pretense. A calm, almost serene smile spread across my face, an act of quiet defiance. It was not a smile of joy, but of absolute finality. I walked back into the hall, my steps slow and deliberate, the burden of years lifting with each one. I walked directly to the table where my biggest letdown name tag rested. Without a word, I reached into my jacket pocket and retrieved the crisp, neatly bound folder containing the mortgage payoff letter and the trust fund documents. The air in the room seemed to crackle. My parents watched, their faces a mixture of confusion and growing apprehension. Mark's smug grin faltered. With slow, deliberate movements, I tore the stack of papers in half, the crisp sound echoing in the suddenly silent room like a gunshot. Then I tore them again, allowing the fragments to flutter onto the pristine white tablecloth. It was a symbolic severing of ties, a public declaration. I uttered no word. I offered no explanation. I simply smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent a shiver down their spines. Then I turned and walked out. The cool air on my face was a welcome contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. The weight of the years lifted with each step, and I did not look back. I left behind a stunned silence, followed by confused murmurs that quickly escalated into a frantic clamor. The chaotic murmurs I left behind swiftly escalated into a panicked roar. I could hear it even as I walked across the manicured lawn to my car, the scent of the roasted chicken and fresh bread now seeming to curdle in the air, a stark contrast to the sour atmosphere inside. I started my engine, the low rumble a comforting sound, and drove away without a backward glance. My phone, which I had silenced minutes before, began to vibrate incessantly in my pocket. I knew what it was. Their calls were a way to disbelief, then dawning horror. Mark, with his usual dismissive bravado, had initially scoffed. "Good riddance," he muttered, convinced I was merely throwing a tantrum. My parents, still simmering in their self-righteous indignation, assumed I was simply attempting to disrupt their meticulously arranged event. They were convinced they had taught me a lesson. But then, a sharp-eyed cousin, Sarah, who always saw through my parents' facade, noticed a small, dislodged piece of paper from the torn pile on the table. It was barely larger than a credit card, but it stood out, distinct from the other shredded white fragments. She picked it up, her brow furrowed in curiosity. It was a gambling slip, a betting receipt from a high-stakes online casino with Mark's name, and a shockingly large sum, far exceeding $50,000, clearly indicating a debt rather than a business investment. This small, seemingly insignificant detail, overlooked in their initial panic, suddenly became a giant, flashing neon sign. "Mark, what is this?" Sarah's voice, usually timid, sliced through the rising murmurs. Mark's face, which had been contorted in a smug smirk moments before, turned ashen. He stammered, tried to snatch the slip, but Sarah held it tightly. The whispers began, then grew louder as the true nature of Mark's venture started to emerge. Other family members, having heard the commotion, gathered around, their eyes wide with revelation. The scent of roasted chicken suddenly felt sickeningly heavy. The joy that had briefly filled the hall when everyone arrived was now replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. Mark's confident smirk collapsed into a desperate, pale mask. He was cornered, his deception exposed not by me, but by a casual observation and a tiny piece of damning evidence. Just as the room erupted in a cacophony of questions and accusations, the side door opened. My lawyer, Mr. Harrison, a sharp, composed man I had quietly retained from my own company's affairs, walked in. He was not invited to the reunion, but I had subtly informed him of the event's potential for drama, and his presence here, a strategic move, was my first overt display of power. He surveyed the chaotic scene with an almost clinical detachment. He calmly approached the table where the fragmented documents lay scattered like fallen leaves, and then, with a clear, authoritative voice, addressed the stunned room. "It appears some documents have been misplaced. I believe this belongs to Mr. Eric Davidson." He held up a full, certified copy of my paternal grandfather's last will and testament. It was not among the papers I had torn. It was a document Mr. Harrison had brought with him, meticulously researched and verified. This document, dated decades ago, explicitly stated that a significant portion of a key family property, the very vacation home in Aspen, Colorado, that my parents frequently flaunted as a family asset, was to be bequeathed solely to Eric, with the proviso that it be managed by the parents until his 25th birthday, then fully transferred. The document proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that this valuable asset had been illegally rerouted and transferred to Mark's name, or simply appropriated by my parents under the guise of family unity and Mark's talent. The silence in the room was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop. My mother's gasp, a sound like a broken violin string. My father's face, moments ago contorted in anger, now turned ashen, the color draining from him like sand through an hourglass. Mark, who moments ago had worn a victorious smirk, now looked like a trapped animal, his eyes darting frantically, his gambling debt now dwarfed by this new, monumental revelation. Mr. Harrison, a master of calm under pressure, continued, his voice steady. He was not accusing, he was simply stating facts, backed by legal precedent. He explained the legal implications and the potential for severe penalties for the parents' actions, including fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. This was not about emotion, it was about justice. Then my Aunt Susan, who had always suspected